Plenary 3 is on building effective boards for sustainable governance, and for that I would like to invite Mr. Nicholas Pigcock, Partner and Head of International Arbitration, Bird and Bird, United Kingdom. Thank you, Nicholas. Hello.
Good morning, everyone. So, good morning all, good afternoon to those watching in India, and for those who've made the journey, welcome to London. I'm delighted to say it's not currently raining, although it's a little bit on-off this week, but not too cold. I'm grateful to my good friend Abhijit and also to the Institute of Company Secretaries of India for the opportunity to speak to you at this conference. So as you've heard, my name is Nicholas Peacock. I'm an English solicitor and advocate. I specialise in dispute resolution, mostly in international dispute resolution. I've been in practice for 25 odd years, mostly based here in London, but also spending 3 years based out in Singapore. And I handle a range of dispute resolution and risk management topics. I handle commercial disputes, of course, in litigation in the High Court, arbitration, and alternative dispute resolution in various forums, as well as investigations and advisory work. And I've also had the pleasure and privilege to focus on India as a jurisdiction for the last 15 years. I've worked with many of India's most prestigious corporates on their investments and operations overseas. And I've also helped international businesses with their operations in India, working, of course, with Indian law firms and advocates. I also, I think relevantly for this session, I'm involved in various organizations and companies within the dispute resolution process. So I sit as a non-executive director on the main hearing centre here in London, the International Dispute Resolution Centre, the IDRC, which is based over by St. Paul's. And I'm also a council member for an organisation which I hope some of you have heard of, called the Mumbai Centre for International Arbitration, which is a new purpose-built arbitration institution set up in India within the last 5 or 6 years, which we hope will help develop the dispute resolution landscape in India. I have an advisory role for several other organizations. I'm also, of course, a business owner myself. I'm a partner and a co-owner in the international business Bird and Bird, which has 31 offices in 22 different jurisdictions and over 1,400 lawyers and legal professionals on our books. Now, today's topic is building effective boards for sustainable governance. And you will not be surprised, therefore, to hear that I approach this topic from the perspective of a lawyer, of an international advisor, as a risk management professional, and as a partner and owner of a business, and also as a longtime friend and fan of India. I will consider the role that boardroom composition plays in successful corporate governance, both in public and in private companies. And what do I mean by corporate governance? It's a term that's commonly used in corporate circles and is defined in a myriad of ways. I like the definition from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, which is simple and straightforward. Corporate governance is the system by which companies are directed and controlled. It is the board's responsibility to set out the values of the company and to ensure that those values are reflected in its practices, processes, and rules. The adoption and implementation of good corporate governance is essential for companies looking to cultivate robust systems that permit agile and sustainable decision-making, while accounting for the interests of a company's many stakeholders and the wider public. All companies that are listed here on the London Stock Exchange are legally required to demonstrate to the public and to shareholders how they are complying with the UK listing rules and the UK Corporate Governance Code. And of course, the Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange also set out myriad standards that companies and their directors must follow. Development of robust corporate governance is not merely a tick box exercise for listed companies. It is a commercial imperative for all firms looking to identify and mitigate risk, to achieve strategic aims, and to become resilient to external and internal crises. And this necessity is sadly and starkly demonstrated when we see occasionally companies and businesses fail. I want to look at this topic in three parts. Firstly, the role of governance professionals, and I'll particularly discuss the role that lawyers and legal professionals can and should play, both as executive and non-executive directors, and how having a lawyer on the board can assist the firm's aims. I'll also look at boardroom challenges and discuss the different types of risk that threaten firms that boards must identify and mitigate, and how good governance and the perspective of lawyers and legal professionals can assist in alleviating those risks. And I'll also touch upon enhancing boardroom independence and how lawyers are able to strengthen boardroom independence and the pitfalls that lawyers must avoid if they are to provide legal advice to firms where they also sit on the board. So, what is a governance professional? Well, I'd like to start by suggesting that we are all governance professionals. All directors, all non-executive directors, all board advisors, lawyers, legal professionals, and certainly company secretaries. We are all governance professionals. We could be on the board, but we don't necessarily have to be on the board to fulfill our duties and to feel our responsibilities. Lawyers, of course, are often advisors to companies and their boards. We can be brought in for specific issues, such as a task of regulatory compliance, a major transaction, a piece of commercial litigation, etc. However, lawyers are also well placed to provide ongoing commercial and strategic advice. In private practice, we lawyers often have the role and I think the privilege of advising on the possible consequences of a particular course of action, but then leaving that decision to take action to somebody else, usually the board or the general counsel or perhaps the company secretary. But that's not always the case, and it doesn't have to be the case. More than half of the DAX 40 firms in Germany and more than half of Fortune 100 companies in the United States have lawyers on their boards. This follows a trend identified by the Cornell Law School in a 2014 report that the proportion of public companies with lawyers on their boards rose from around 25% in the year 2000 to almost 44% in the year 2009, a reflection perhaps of a turbulent and challenging decade that caused those companies to want to bolster the legal and advisory forces on their board. These numbers are even higher for companies operating in sectors that are more at risk for litigation or regulatory issues, such as finance, energy, and pharmaceuticals. Again, Cornell Law School found that lawyer directors tend to be found more in larger companies, particularly those listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and companies with a greater number of operating segments, such as the likes of Google, Amazon, and Apple. Also, they found amongst the financial services sector that 77% of US banks had lawyers as directors. So why is this? What do lawyers and legal professionals bring to boards? Well, consider the core pillars, which I think underpin effective corporate governance, such as the 5 pillars identified by PwC in a 2015 report on corporate governance in the boardroom. Firstly, the pillar of developing leadership, a leadership strategy and cultivating the right corporate culture. Secondly, maintaining and developing structures to oversee firm performance, so leadership and oversight. Thirdly, assessing, managing, and mitigating risk. Fourthly, developing proper management, information, and controls, especially where these relate to remuneration. And lastly, fostering relations with shareholders and other stakeholders through transparent governance and reporting. So what are legal professional strengths in this context? Well, we are typically analytical and are used to dealing with complexity. Lawyers spend their careers absorbing large amounts of facts and data, assessing what is material to the issue at hand, and communicating an articulate and concise view of how best to proceed based on this information. Experienced lawyers are able to couple their analytical skills with their commercial awareness and address future business opportunities and threats, thereby evolving from pure legal advisors to trusted commercial advisors. Legally trained board directors bring governance, compliance, and regulatory knowledge and experience to companies' boards. For example, if you had a lawyer director with a background in IP law, they would be able to help the company to perceive risks and opportunities amongst its patent portfolio. Similarly, disputes lawyers are able not only to advise on prospective or ongoing actual litigation, but also to frame the business of the company and to frame those future risks within the context of the business's wider objectives, something that can be beyond external advisors brought in for a specific purpose. And as I've mentioned, lawyers in private practice are well aware that clients' businesses face challenges because they also belong to and run their own commercial enterprise. They don't just provide advice, they manage their own businesses. And lawyers in this context provide a diversity of experience and insight that cannot be replicated by those with a purely business or financial background. Lawyers have seen similar issues before. They might bring a knowledge of a particular sector built up over years or decades and have been involved in advising similar businesses on similar areas in the past. And we're also used to operating in grey areas and dealing with uncertainty. Lawyers are supremely well placed to assist a company in navigating through those grey areas, such as competition risk, as we've just heard about, taxation risk, HR practices, litigation tactics, and strategy. And I think you put that in the context of the boardroom challenges. Boards are responsible for assessing, managing, and mitigating those risks to their respective firms at all times, as well, of course, as spotting and seizing opportunities. Managing and mitigating risk is one of the key skills in the toolkits of lawyer directors and is one of the primary ways they can add value to a board. However, on a board, of course, a lawyer director must be proactive as well as reactive when it comes to risk management. And what do I mean by risk in this context? Well, again, going back to a helpful 2015 report by PwC, they categorized 4 types of risk that must be managed by a company's board. Firstly, financial risk. This is a regular focus for both private and public boards. The board must ensure that profit margins are maintained, that expenditure is kept at reasonable levels, and there is adequate cash on the balance sheet. And of course, there is adequate investment back into the business. The analysis of financial risk is more within the wheelhouse of accountants and forensic financial professionals. However, lawyers are also able to advise on, for example, regulatory duties that might impact the financial situation. Secondly, consider operational risks. These are usually the risks arising from the firm's products or services. Lawyer directors with specific expertise in this area are able to advise boards on non-compliance issues, but are also able to frame these issues within the context of the firm's wider business. Thirdly, consider hazard risks as defined by PwC. These are risks that are unpredictable and emerge from left field, such as, for example, the pandemic. The pandemic, of course, saw an unprecedented demand for legal services from companies due to an ever-changing legal and regulatory landscape, including relating to employment, supply chains, as well as disruption to ongoing agreements and day-to-day business. But hazard risks are not just siloed to black swan events, such as a pandemic. They're also more repeatable hazards, such as strikes, as recently seen in many parts of Europe. Reverse stress testing is a useful tool that companies can use to identify gaps in their risk management strategies. And fourthly and lastly, consider strategic risks. This is when the strategy of the business is out of sync with the needs of the market. And classic examples of that would be Blockbuster Video, which failed to take heed of the streaming revolution and chose to stick to a DVD rental model. Or indeed, famously, of course, Kodak, which was caught out selling camera film as cameras went digital. And I'm not blind to the fact that law firms too may face challenges over the next few years. Will the current business model for advisory services survive in a world driven by AI? That's a topic that I'll leave you to pick up at another time. So this takes me to the important topic of board independence. Lawyers, where they are directors, as with all directors, will need to be mindful of their own independence as well as that of the board on which they are serving. Conflicts of interest are to be identified and avoided. Section 175 of the UK Companies Act provides that a director of a company must avoid a situation in which he or she has or can have a direct or indirect interest that conflicts or possibly may conflict with the interests of the company. Any director owes a duty to the company to act in such a way that promotes the best interests of and success of the company for the benefit of its shareholders, not tainted by other interests or considerations. And in non-executive directorship, a lawyer director must bring objectivity to executive management decisions to properly hold the board to account. Now, of course, if the same director is also advising the company in their role as a lawyer with the company as the client, there may be a tension between the individual's duty as a director to promote the success of the company and their duty as advisor, which they may owe to a client. For example, this could arise on the receipt of confidential information, which a lawyer may have a duty to keep confidential, which may conflict at times with the duty a director feels towards the company and its shareholders. Now, lawyer directors need to be mindful of the balance that needs to be struck between advising the company as their client in their capacity as a solicitor and their director's duties, including those owed under the Companies Act to which I've just referred. But this is a balance, I would say, that is capable of being struck in most circumstances. As ever, it will be important to be clear on what role is being undertaken, and whether the individual is acting as a director, as an advisor, or indeed as both. Which brings me to my conclusion. A good board is a rainbow of talents. As we all surely know, diversity enhances decision-making, and good decision-making makes for good corporate governance. This means diversity of background, of experience, and of skill set. Governance professionals all play a vital role in ensuring that boards have the facts and advice necessary to fulfill their role. But don't forget the ability of lawyers and those governance professionals also to bring their voices, their talents, and their perspectives to that board. Board independence requires rigor, incisiveness, and sometimes bravery. Groupthink on boards is dangerous. So is unwillingness to test what is presented to a board. Lawyers who do test and question what is being put in front of them play a vital role in assessing, quantifying, and managing risk of all types. Only when risk is appropriately controlled can a business thrive, which is, of course, the aim of all boards seeking to achieve sustainable governance. Those are my thoughts. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you again to the organisers and to my good friend Abhijit for inviting me to this conference. I wish you well for the rest of the sessions. Yeah.
Which are now, when you say you have raised a very it's coming back to me back to Phoenix that conflict of interest. Now you are at the corporate organizational view that is different from particular companies view. Now, which hat are you wearing? Because you have correctly said, I am supposed to prove success of the company, I am supposed to see that the company is being run properly. Now, always I am conflicted. Therefore, if some decision is to take it, which is good for the global business as a whole, but may not be that good for a particular company. What my role as an individual director for that?
Yeah. Well, these are tricky situations, especially in dealing with a business as complex as the one that you deal with, Abhijit. I think you've identified the dichotomy, and I think also what has to be the solution, although it is complicated, which is that you have to look at which hat you are wearing at any given occasion. And so if you are drafting the minutes of a board meeting of a particular company, then the decisions taken within that board meeting have to be those of that company, which, as you say, may from time to time conflict. You may find that a group subsidiary has different interest to a head company or a sister company. But those have to be resolved through an interplay of ownership and control amongst the corporate group, rather than any individual director blurring his or her views of the decision they are being asked to make. So if you are a director of a subsidiary company, but also a director of a group company, and those companies have different interests in the transaction, nonetheless, you must make each decision based on the role you are performing at that time. And of course, the way corporate structures work is that if the board of a subsidiary company needs to make one decision in the interest of that company, but the group company which controls it has a different view, then the control can be exerted through ownership and through shareholder voting rights. And it's that route that you have to take, rather than blurring your decisions as a director and saying, well, if I made the decision on behalf of the group company, I might say this, but because the head company wants a different view, I'll make a different decision. That cannot be the thought process, as I'm sure you've faced in many occasions and have worked your way through. It has to be that control analysis, that I make one decision on behalf of the company, and if the owners of that company take a different view, they have the ability through their ownership rights and through shareholders' resolutions to force the company to adopt a different strategy. And if I, as a director, feel that is incompatible with my interests, then I have a different and thorny problem. Thank you. Thank you for the interesting question. Very good. Thank you.